Hello everyone, and here are the details of today's video. The accusation that a Chinese fighter jet locked its targeting radar onto a Japanese aircraft is more than a technical dispute. It is a warning flare in a region where the balance of power is shifting, history remains unresolved, and the risk of miscalculation grows with every close encounter. Japan's claim may be accurate. Tokyo's Air Self-Defense Force operates some of the world's most advanced radar detection systems, but the full truth is deliberately obscured because revealing hard evidence would expose sensitive capabilities that no nation is willing to disclose lightly. What matters, therefore, is not only whether the radar lock occurred, but what the accusation represents in this fragile strategic space. The East China Sea is no ordinary boundary. It is political geography shaped by memory, rivalry, and the slow but relentless transformation of Asia's security architecture. Japan and China are not merely two neighbors in dispute over a group of uninhabited islands. They are two civilizations navigating a century of mistrust. Every aerial maneuver, every naval patrol, every radar sweep is embedded in this deeper narrative. When Japan announces that a Chinese jet has locked on to one of its aircraft, it is signaling more than a tactical threat. It is expressing a growing anxiety that the old regional order, long guaranteed by American primacy, is eroding, and that Japan now faces a far more assertive China willing to challenge its space in the sky and at sea. But Japan is not merely reacting, it is interpreting a pattern. Over the past decade, China has increased its military activity around the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, frequently crossing the median line of the East China Sea that was once an informal boundary of restraint. Locking radar onto an adversary is one of the most provocative actions short of firing a weapon. It suggests intent or at least readiness to escalate, whether to send a political message or to test the response of the other side. For Tokyo, this incident fits into a larger trend. China is pressing, probing, and stretching the margins of what Japan has historically tolerated. Tokyo's accusation also reflects a dilemma of modern deterrence. Japan must respond firmly enough to signal that it will not be intimidated, yet cautiously enough to avoid giving China a pretext for further aggression. That balance is increasingly difficult to maintain. For every action China takes, Japan must navigate a narrow path between reassurance and resistance, not only to safeguard its territorial claims, but also to preserve stability in a region where a single misstep could unleash forces far larger than the aircraft involved. In this sense, the radar locking incident is not an isolated event. It is a symptom of a broader strategic transformation. China is asserting greater control over the East China Sea, and Japan is confronting the reality that its long era of geopolitical predictability has ended. The skies above them now carry not just aircraft, but a silent contest over the future of Asian order. To understand why incidents in the East China Sea keep recurring, one must first grasp the geography of tension, a geography that is not merely physical, but historical and psychological. The waters where Japan and China increasingly encounter one another are not vast open spaces. They are narrow corridors of overlapping claims, symbolic boundaries of national identity, and stepping stones in a much larger strategic map that stretches from Siberia to the South China Sea. At the heart of this contested space lies the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, uninhabited rocks, yet charged with meaning far beyond their physical value. For Japan, they are a testament to post-war sovereignty and maritime rights. For China, they evoke unresolved grievances from the era of imperial encroachment. Each flyover, each patrol, each radar lock becomes an act of historical assertion. In this way, the islands function as a mirror in which both nations see their national narratives reflected, yet the deeper strategic logic reaches far beyond these islets. Japan sits at the apex of what could be called the Arc of Constraint, a chain of islands that runs from Hokkaido through Okinawa to Taiwan and the Philippines. This chain effectively hems in China's navy, limiting its ability to move freely into the Pacific. For Beijing, breaking through this arc is a prerequisite for becoming a true maritime power. For Tokyo, maintaining this arc is essential to its own security and to the integrity of the U.S.-led alliance system. Thus, every aerial confrontation over the East China Sea is part of a larger struggle over who controls access to the Pacific. This is not simply a border dispute, it is a contest over the architecture of Asian power. China seeks strategic depth, Japan seeks strategic stability. Both goals are rational, both goals are incompatible. Japan also views China's rise through the lens of vulnerability. The country is highly dependent on maritime trade, imported energy, and secure sea lanes. Any disruption, whether from hostile submarines, militarized fishing fleets, or aggressive air maneuvers, immediately threatens Japan's economic lifeline. The airspace over the East China Sea is therefore not just a tactical zone, but a protective shield for the Japanese economy. China, for its part, is driven by a sense of encirclement. It sees Japan as an extension of American influence, forward outpost of a U.S. security strategy that Beijing interprets as containment. When Japanese aircraft intercept Chinese jets, Beijing perceives not Japan alone, but the shadow of Washington behind the encounter. This is why tensions cannot simply be resolved. They emerge from the structural geometry of the region, a rising power-seeking room to expand, and an established power aligned with the world's strongest military alliance seeking to maintain the status quo. Geography shapes strategy, strategy shapes identity, and identity shapes conflict. The East China Sea has become the theater where these forces collide. Radar locks and close encounters are merely the symptoms of a much deeper geopolitical equation, one that neither side can ignore, and both sides feel increasingly compelled to test. Japan's response to China's growing assertiveness is neither impulsive nor symbolic. It is the product of a profound strategic shift, one of the most significant in Japan's post-war history. For decades, Japan relied on the American security umbrella and maintained a defensive posture constrained by constitutional limits. Yet, as China builds the world's largest navy, expands its air presence, and pushes relentlessly into contested waters, Tokyo now recognizes that the era of military restraint is no longer sustainable. What emerges is a Japan preparing soberly and systematically for a far more dangerous regional environment. The foundation of this posture is Japan's investment in air superiority. The Japan Air Self-Defense Force is upgrading to cutting-edge F-35A and F-35B fighters capable of both stealth penetration and distributed basing. These jets are paired with advanced AESA radar systems, creating an air defense network designed to detect and track Chinese aircraft long before they enter contested space. The radar lock incident only reinforces Japan's belief that modern air warfare is decided by seconds and that technological asymmetry is its most reliable shield. Yet air power alone cannot secure Japan's interests. The country sits beside some of the world's most contested maritime corridors, where Chinese destroyers, Coast Guard vessels, and maritime militia increasingly operate. In response, Japan is expanding its fleet of Aegis-equipped destroyers, enhancing its submarine fleet with quieter lithium-ion battery technology, and deploying long-range anti-ship missiles capable of striking vessels far beyond Japan's immediate waters. These developments represent a shift from passive defense to active denial, ensuring that any hostile operation would face immediate layered resistance. The most striking transformation, however, lies in Japan's emerging counterstrike capability. Traditionally unthinkable, Japan now fields missiles that can hit military bases on the Chinese mainland if an attack appears imminent. This evolution does not reflect aggressive intent, but rather a sober recognition. In an age of hypersonic weapons and precision strikes, defense alone may not deter a determined adversary. Japan's preparations also extend to the Taiwan question. Tokyo views Taiwan not merely as a distant issue, but as integral to its own security. A Chinese takeover of Taiwan would shift the balance of power dramatically, placing PLA forces directly opposite Japan's southern islands. To prevent such an outcome, Japan is strengthening joint training with U.S. forces, upgrading bases across Okinawa, and coordinating with Australia and the Philippines to form an arc of deterrence surrounding the Taiwan Strait. But Japan's strategy is ultimately shaped by restraint as much as readiness. Tokyo does not seek confrontation, it seeks stability. Yet stability today requires more than diplomacy, it requires credible capability. Every new radar system, every missile battery, every maritime patrol plane is part of a broader message. Japan is no longer a passive observer in Asia's security landscape. It is preparing for a future in which it must take responsibility for its own defense, even as it works with allies to prevent the unthinkable. China's posture in the East China Sea is not a collection of isolated provocations. It is a coherent, long-term strategy aimed at reshaping the regional order in its favor. To Beijing, the radar lock incident is not merely a tactical moment of risk. It is part of a broader campaign to normalize Chinese presence, expand Chinese authority, and signal that the old boundaries drawn by history or upheld by the U.S.-led order no longer define China's strategic horizon. Whether the radar lock occurred exactly as Japan claims is almost secondary. What matters is that China's behavior fits a deliberate pattern, incremental pressure designed to shift the balance of control without triggering open conflict. Central to China's logic is the concept of gray zone operations, actions that fall below the threshold of war but are forceful enough to challenge an opponent's resolve. By sending aircraft close to Japanese airspace, escorting survey vessels into disputed waters, deploying Coast Guard ships near the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, or allegedly locking radar onto Japanese jets, Beijing is testing Tokyo's reactions, probing its thresholds, and shaping its expectations of Chinese behavior. Each move expands what China considers normal and with each normalization, Japan's space to maneuver shrinks. This approach also aligns with China's broader narrative that it is reclaiming its rightful position in the region after a century of humiliation and foreign interference. The East China Sea, in Beijing's view, is not simply contested airspace. It is part of a historical geography that China believes was unjustly constrained by past treaties and the post-war security architecture. When Beijing signals assertiveness, it is communicating not only to Japan, but to its own domestic audience. The Chinese state is strong, confident, and unyielding. Beijing's increasing military activity also serves a deeper strategic aim, the need to secure strategic depth. China's eastern seaboard is densely populated, economically vital, and militarily vulnerable. The island chain running from Japan to Taiwan limits China's naval mobility and subjects the PLA to surveillance and containment. By pushing outward into the East China Sea, into the Taiwan Strait, and into the Western Pacific, China seeks to break through this perceived encirclement and achieve the maritime freedom it considers necessary for great power status. Furthermore, China's pressure on Japan is inseparable from its Taiwan calculus. Demonstrating dominance in the skies near Japan reinforces Beijing's message that any external interference in the Taiwan issue will be confronted decisively. In this context, radar locking, if true, becomes less a threatening gesture toward Japan itself and more a symbolic warning to the entire U.S.-Japan alliance. China will not be deterred by shows of strength or diplomatic protests. Yet China's strategy also carries significant risks. Gray zone operations rely on precise control, but they operate in an environment where split-second decisions by pilots or commanders could transform psychological pressure into unintended escalation. As both air forces operate in dangerously close quarters, the margin for error narrows. In essence, China's behavior mirrors the paradox of rising powers throughout history. Confidence mixes with insecurity, ambition with anxiety. Beijing presses forward because it believes the regional order must change. Japan resists because it believes the regional order must hold. Between these two convictions lies a geopolitical fault line that grows more fragile with each encounter in the sky. The radar lock incident, whether precisely as Japan describes or not, is a symptom of a deeper reality. East Asia is entering a period in which accidents can carry the weight of history. A brief burst of radar energy, a misinterpreted maneuver, pilot's instinctive reaction, any of these could transform a tense encounter into an irreversible chain of escalation. The structures that once anchored regional stability are weakening, replaced by competitive postures, expanding militaries, and narratives of national destiny. In this environment, Japan faces the daunting task of preserving peace in an increasingly fragile system. Tokyo understands that stability cannot rely on hope alone. It requires deterrence, not deterrence through domination, but deterrence through clarity. Japan's expanding capabilities, from long-range missiles to upgraded air defenses, are intended not to provoke China, but to signal that coercion will not succeed. A strong Japan does not eliminate risk, but it reduces China's incentive to test Japan's resolve. Yet deterrence is only one side of the equation. The other side is communication, a softer yet equally vital tool. Even amid rivalry, nations must maintain channels to prevent miscalculation. Japan and China periodically engage in defense dialogues, hotline agreements, and maritime communication protocols, but these mechanisms remain fragile and underused. In times of heightened nationalistic sentiment, political leaders may prioritize symbolic firmness over practical restraint, weakening the very tools designed to prevent crises. The Taiwan question intensifies this fragility. Japan recognizes that a conflict over Taiwan would inevitably drag it into a regional war. Its southern islands lie directly in the path of any military operation, and U.S. bases on Japanese soil would be central to a U.S. response. Thus, Japan's interest is not merely in preventing conflict with China directly, but in preventing conflict anywhere in the first island chain. The more China presses Taiwan, the more Japan must prepare, yet the more Japan prepares, the more China perceives encirclement. This circular logic of insecurity, where each side's defensive measures look offensive to the other, defines the strategic dilemma of East Asia. Breaking this cycle requires more than military modernization. It requires a reimagining of regional order. Such an order would acknowledge China's growing influence while preserving Japan's autonomy and the sovereignty of smaller states. It would involve confidence-building measures, shared maritime rules, economic interdependence that is not weaponized, and an acceptance that no nation, however powerful, can unilaterally impose stability. For now, however, the region remains suspended between two futures. One is a future of managed competition, where rivalries persist but are contained by restraint and communication. The other is a future shaped by miscalculation and abrupt descent into conflict sparked by an encounter in the sky or an incident at sea. Japan stands at the center of this crossroads. It cannot retreat from the challenge, yet it cannot afford escalation. Its task is to navigate a narrow path, strong enough to deter, flexible enough to de-escalate, and wise enough to recognize that in a multipolar Asia, peace will be earned not through dominance, but through balance.